Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting live stream with immigrationquestion.com. Our topic today was purposely created to give you insight into understanding non immigrant visa, essential insights, and application strategies. My name is Kunal Bechu, and I would be your host for the session. Many people aren't aware of the non-immigrant visas or the strategies for applying. Today's webinar will cover the different types, key steps in the application process, and the tips for handling common challenges like delays or denials. Joining us in today's session is a seasoned immigration attorney, attorney Wendy R. Barlow, has a proven track record of success in handling wide range of immigration matters, from marriage-based green cards to complex appeals and federal litigation. She is experienced in removal of defense, asylum applications, waivers of inadmissibility, and non-immigrant visas, helping clients navigate the ever-evolving immigration landscape. Please welcome with me Attorney Barlow. We are pleased to have you on our show today.
Hi, thank you, KB. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure indeed. So, to our audience streaming on various online platforms, it's all about getting prepared for this session. I know we are excited, so grab your notepads and pens and let's dive right in. Attorney Barlow, as I said in the beginning, many people do not know about the non-immigrant visa and how it works or even exists in the first place. Could you start by walking us through the various types of non-immigrant visas? How do one determine which visa is the best fit for them?
Okay. Yeah, that's there are a lot of non-immigrant visas. Most individuals, if they are familiar, they're familiar with two types:
Mhm.
B1, B2, which is the tourist or visitor visa, and H1B, which is a popular employment-based visa. So most of the visas are either employment-based or some purpose-based. The only one that really doesn't have a defined purpose is the tourism visa. And by lack of
Mhm.
definition, I mean, you can come for vacation, you can come for a conference. It's not tied to a specific event. It's just for you to come for tourism purposes. Um, Another popular one is the student visa. That's where a lot of foreign nationals come to study here. It's primarily used for college education, but it can be used for certain high schools. But again, most people come here to do their bachelor's, master's, or PhD. Um, and then, from there, there's many more employment visas. I know I said
Mhm.
H-1B, but then
Yeah.
there's also the L-1 visas, which are for intercompany transferees. So, for example, if you work for a multinational corporation and they have a entity in, China, and they have an
Mhm.
entity in the
Yeah.
US, and they want to transfer you from China to the US, they can do that if they could show you're either a manager, executive, or an employee with like specialized knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, and that visa is great for employment purposes because there's not a lot of caps. There's no cap to it. So H-1B, we only give so many out a year, and they're very popular. L-1, there's no cap. It's also nice because it's not just for, people think multinational corporation, they think Microsoft, they think Coca-Cola, they think, you know, IBM, Salesforce. They're thinking the big companies.
Mhm.
You can use this for any size company as long as there are actually two entities. So if you have entity in the UK and you have an entity here, you can use it. You can also use it to transfer an employee to set up an entity here. So if you have a company in India and now you want to open a branch in the US, you can actually get an L1 visa, an L1A visa to come and establish a new office here. So that's one. Then we have E2s, which are investor visas for
Mhm.
temporary. That's not the one people commonly think of. Investor visas, they tend to think EB5, which is
Mhm.
800 to $1.5 million investment.
Mhm.
Not a lot of people have that much money to invest. E2
True.
visas allow you to invest in the US, set up a company, purchase a company, whatever may be the scenario that you can run. There's limitations on this visa because you do have um, It has to be a country we have a treaty with, and we don't have a treaty with every country for this, but
Hmm.
a lot of countries are included. Um, O visas for people with extraordinary ability. There's a lot of different ones. One of the best ways to kind of get an idea of what may be your best option is honestly going to the Department of State's website. Um,
Hmm.
they publish, they have all the visa types, or even if you don't want to, you could go to the website for the US embassy or consulate in your country, because
Hmm.
they do have a list of non-immigrant visas, and it kind of, they do have a wizard, like a, visa wizard application, where you can put what country you have citizenship, what the purpose of your travel is, and they'll help you narrow down options. If it's, you get multiple potential options and you're still not, satisfied, or you're still not sure which one's right, then the next step would be to contact an attorney, whether myself or there's a lot of us out there. And
Yeah.
most of us, honestly, we do consultations by video, WhatsApp, FaceTime. I mean, I do consultations on all different video platforms by phone. I have
Awesome.
clients I've never met, and we can sit down and, go through, what are you trying to achieve, and sometimes that's even, what are your long-term goals? Because
Hmm.
sometimes I get people who, they just want that tourist visa. They want to take the kids to Disney. That's all they want to do. But maybe they've had some roadblocks getting visas in the past. And
Hmm.
then I have individuals who want to come here, but their long-term goal is to get a green card and citizenship. So we have to determine, okay, what's going to work best to get you to your end goal.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the best starting point, honestly, I have to give them credit. This Department of State and the
Yeah.
embassy websites, they do have a nice tool to help you at least narrow down what may be your options.
That sounds good. Really interesting. So we're off to an amazing start, and thank you for that. Now, once someone has identified the right type of visa, what would you say will be the essential steps in the application process? Could you give our audience a guide through gathering the required documentations and what is expected during the visa interview?
Okay. So um, I'll break it down. There's two types of visas
Yeah.
that, like, overarching themes. So the first one is just your visas where you don't need a petition. So in the employment-based side, most of those visas require an employer to file a petition with USCIS here that's first approved before you go to the second stage.
Yeah.
The other ones are just essentially direct file visas. So if you're doing like a tourist visa or a um, student visa, first things first, figure out what school you're going to go to, get admitted. The schools have what are called DSOs. These
Mhm.
are officers who deal with international students and help them get the I-20 that they need to then apply for the student visa. But for the most part, in general, visa application starts with what's called a DS 160. That's D as in David, S as in Sam. 160. It's an online application. If you Google it, just that term, it'll come up. And you pick the embassy location you want to apply to, fill out some information, it generates an application. You fill out the application. The best piece of advice I can give someone filling that out is be truthful. Um, if you lie on that application and you are caught in that lie, you trigger a permanent bar to admission to the US.
Sure.
It's not like a 3-year thing, a 10-year thing. It's
Hmm.
permanent, and you need a waiver to overcome that. That's one of the worst things you can do, is put yourself in that position. Then it's just filling out it. It's um, the website can be temperamental, to put it mildly. But what I recommend is, as you're filling it out, a lot of times when I'm helping a client, once we
Hmm.
finish a page, we hit save, because you don't know how many times I've been timed out of that application. So, um, and if you get timed out halfway through, you will lose all that you've already done. Um, you fill it out completely. Then the next step is to schedule your appointment. The embassies all use a scheduling service So some use USA Travel Docs, some use this company AIS. It will tell you which one you have to go to, but you go to
Mm-hmm.
that, you submit your fee for your visa, schedule your appointment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then getting ready wise, make sure, and this is probably something you should do ahead of time, make sure your passport has at least 6 months of validity in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, have your passport, have your birth certificate, have your marriage certificate, if applicable, divorce decrees. If your name has changed at all, like through marriage or divorce, make sure you have all those records so that they know when they
Yeah.
look at your passport, if it's in one name, it makes sense why it's in that name and you're now known as
Mm-hmm.
this. Um, and then, depending on the type of visa, the other documents. So, for example, a tourist visa, let's say the purpose of your trip is to attend a conference. Maybe have paperwork showing you've paid to attend the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if it's to come for a business meeting, a letter from your employer or the company you're visiting explaining that's the reason you're coming. If you're coming for your cousin's wedding, the wedding invitation,
Mm-hmm.
just because this shows why you're coming. And also, one thing is be prepared for them to potentially ask who's paying for the trip and how you can afford it, because unfortunately a lot of individuals will use tourist visas to come and work without authorization. So consular officials can be skeptical. They want to know that you can afford the trip that you're making to the US, that once you're here
Mm-hmm.
you can afford to pay for your meals, your housing. Now you could be
Mm-hmm.
staying with your parents and you'll just tell them that. That's fine, but you just want to make sure you know you can afford the trip you're telling them you're taking. If it's a student visa, you're going to need that I-20 I talked about from the school.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to need financial records to show who's covering the cost of your schooling. A lot of times it's a parent. Um, Sometimes it's a family member in the US that may be particularly financially well off and is willing to help you and your family out. But you just want to have that documented that you can cover the cost. And the cost will be indicated on that I-20. It has the cost of the tuition as well as estimated living expenses. Um, that's general direct file ones. When you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the petition based ones, you need that approval first from USCIS. And then you're going to need to take things in that show that you are qualified for that job. So, for example, if it's an H-1B, you're going to want to have your degree and your transcript. If it's from a foreign education institution, you're going to want an evaluation. Most
Mm-hmm.
of this stuff is done by the attorneys, and you'll have that handed to you. But you want to make sure you have these things. These are not usually, when you're talking employment based, it's not usually self prepared. It's usually attorney
Mm-hmm.
prepared. Your passport. And if you're married and you have kids and they're coming with you, you want to have the marriage certificate. You want to have the kids' birth certificates to show everybody's uh, relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I could keep going, but I want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure I address the questions you have.
Certainly, no, thank you, and really awesome advice, Tony Barlow. I say there's a lot of stories out there, right? So we heard stories about applicants facing challenges like delays, even denials. What are some of the common issues people encounter during the visa process, and what strategies can they use to overcome and address these challenges?
So one thing that is be besides filling out the application correctly and
Yeah.
accurately, that's first things first. If after you submit the application before the interview, you're reviewing the application, because I have this a lot, people start panicking. Oh, I have a typo. I put
Hmm.
26 instead of 25th. And it's like, don't worry too much. You can go online. You can't correct your DS 160 once it's filed, but you
Hmm.
can do a new one. And you can print that out because you take the barcode from that one. And you can take that barcode in and they will scan that one. And that's the application they will use. Aside from that, be prepared. Know what time your appointment is. Make sure you get to the consulate early. You got to go through security like worse than an airport. So you want to make sure you're there early, have time, have everything organized. If you're taking documents in with you, don't take them all shoved into like a FedEx or DHL envelope where you're like this and have it. Oh, this is my passport. This is the birth certificates. Because when the consular official asks you for it, because
Hmm.
these interviews are only a few minutes, you know, you want to keep being as efficient as possible and organized. Then the next thing is during the interview, yes, it's going to be you're going to be nervous. Everybody's nervous during these things. But make sure you're paying attention to what the officer is saying to you. I've come across so many times where people just get so flustered, they're not listening. And then that creates tension during the interview. And officers are human beings. If you're making this interview take 100 times longer than it should, and you're not producing the documents they're asking for, they're going to just refuse you and move on. Um, so make sure you're listening. If they're asking you, what is your name? Tell them your name. Don't be pulling out your passport,
Hmm.
pay attention. The other thing too is if you're asked, do you want to proceed in English or whatever your native language may be, whether it's
Hmm.
Spanish, Russian, Italian, if you are not fluent in English, do not do the interview in English. You do not get extra points because you can speak English. This is a misconception I get a lot is that, well, if I talk to the officer in English, they're going to approve me over if I speak in Spanish. That's
Hmm.
not the case, and you're more likely to make a mistake because you didn't understand the question fully because that's not your native language. So if there's an interpreter available, take advantage of it. That's what they're there for. Um, and then again, know the purpose of your trip. Whether you're applying for a work visa or a tourist visa or a student visa, you should know why you want this visa. If you're a tourist visa, what is the purpose of this upcoming trip that you want to take? Where will you plan to stay? It's not written
Hmm.
in stone, but you have to present what your plans are. If it's to come for work, you should know who you're going to be working for, where the office is located. I know this sounds like it's common sense, but these are things that trip people up because they don't pay attention. Who's going to be your supervisor? What is your job title? You know, what you could be a computer programmer, but then on the forms you're a software engineer. Granted,
Hmm.
they're pretty much, and not to offend anybody, but they're pretty much the same thing. They
Hmm.
what the actual do is the same. But if you come in and you're like, I'm a computer programmer, and they filed a software engineer, you get an officer that's a real stickler that could
Yeah.
raise issues. So it's important that you know what's in your visa application. And the last thing, be wary of preparers. I am
Hmm.
not outright saying you can't use anybody to help you. I know in a lot of foreign countries there are services, but make sure you are actually reviewing your application before it is submitted because it's not the preparer who has the problems if it's wrong, it's you.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, there are horror stories with preparers. Preparers will put things in like, say, someone's married when they're not, um, because it's a tie to the country. And now they go to the interview and they're like, oh, and take these documents, and people never look at it. So if you're using a preparer, just make sure you know what they put in your application, know what documents you're taking in, because later on, I didn't know is not going to be an excuse for the consulate.
Hmm. Awesome. Some really good insights and good advice. So thank you for your time so far. If you're just tuning in from any social media platform, well, better late than never. Today we have a reputable immigration lawyer who has thus far done an incredible justice to today's topic. This is immigrationquestion.com, a platform station to make the journey of every immigrant in the US easier and better. Ask your immigration questions for free in any language, and you will be connected with a verified attorney who can help guide you through any legal decision that's required. On the attorney side, it's a great way to build your practice. The platform provides access to a steady flow of potential clients who are actively seeking help with their immigration cases. The main goal is to make it easy for clients to find the right legal support while offering lawyers like yourself an efficient way to connect with those who need their expertise. To our wonderful audience, please post your questions you have in the chat when we are open for the live Q&A. We will answer as many questions as possible given the time. Attorney Barlow, for those already in the US, right, on the non immigrant visa, what are the options if they want to extend their stay, renew their visa, or even change their status?
Right. So that's actually a great question. So first things first, um, it's important to understand that a visa is an entry document. So if your visa, you know, expires, let's say it expires December 25th and you enter the country on December 23rd. That doesn't mean you have to leave on the 25th. That's when your visa expires. The visa is just used to get in. When you come into the country, they are going to issue you what's called an I-94. That's the document that actually tells you how long you can stay. And that's dictated by the purpose of your trip. If you're a visitor, you'll get up to 6 months. If you're coming for a work visa, it could be up to 3 years. If it's a student visa, you'll get what's called duration of status, which means essentially as long as you stay in school, you get to stay. Um, if you're here already and you need to extend your status or change your status, there is a way. Um, the only people who cannot extend or change their status in the US are those who enter with the visa waiver program. So if you've entered with that, you cannot extend your stay. You have to leave. There is a procedure if an emergency happens, like you break your leg 2 days before, but it's not through this extension. It's rather contacting and going through the Department of Homeland Security. So if that happens, please work with an attorney. Otherwise, if you're going to change your status, um, you file an application. It's a I-539 for some individuals, and that allows you to change your status. So, for example, if you came in as a tourist, and while you were here, you got to tour your dream school and got admitted, and now you just want to start your studies right away, you can do a change of status from that to F1, which is the student
Hmm.
visa. If you're changing to an employment visa, if you remember before we talked about those petitions, you need one of those. Most of those are filed on what's called a Form I-129. It's done by your employer, not you, and they can request a change of status as part of that. With these applications, as you can imagine, you have to submit documents such as proof of status. You have to submit a copy of your passport. If it's extending your stay, like you're here as a tourist and you want to stay a little longer, you need to provide like bank statements to show you can afford to stay, or otherwise how you're covering the cost of living. It's also good to try to provide an explanation of why you need to stay, because again, they usually give you 6 months when you come in. So 6 months is a pretty long time to stay as a visitor uh, for tourism purposes. So if it needs to be longer, you usually have to explain what that's for. Um, and then the only thing that's very important is
Yeah.
if you're either extending or changing your status, you need to file it before your current status expires.
Okay.
If you wait until it expires, you can no longer extend or change your status in the US. You're going to need to leave and apply for the appropriate visa overseas or make arrangements to return to the US if it's just like an extension on a B1, B2.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but it all has to be received by USCIS and accepted for processing before your status expires.
Certainly, thank you. So, just before we go into our live Q&A session, it's common knowledge that the U.S. immigration law are always evolving, and there are recent policy changes that people should be aware of when applying for or maintaining their non-immigrant visa status. Is that correct?
Yes. Most of the time when it comes to non-immigrants, for the most part, the issue is travel restrictions. During the Trump administration, we had a lot more severe travel restrictions
Hmm.
on individuals from specific countries. Uh, you know, that has backtracked. That doesn't mean individuals from those countries aren't subjected to extra security clearances, but it's not like outright travel bans as had been imposed before. There can also be bans like during COVID. We
Hmm.
had either there were bans, and then at a certain point there were restrictions. So you had to make sure Once, for example, once the vaccine became readily available, you had to have proof of vaccination to enter the US by air. So these are things that you want to make sure. Right now, individuals from certain countries in Africa are facing additional health screening when entering the US. It's nothing personal. It has to do with the Marburg um, virus. I think it's a virus. Sorry if I misstated what it, but it's Marburg. And so they're going through additional health screenings just to make sure that it's safe for them to enter. So one of the best things you can do is check on the U.S. Embassy or consulate site where you're the country you're living in or you're a citizen of, and they do indicate up to date travel restrictions or problems. When it comes to overall policy, yes, these visas have been in place forever for the most part, and they're statutory, so there's not a lot of change. It does just depend on the administration. They could make it, for example, there was a period of time where they were trying to restructure how H-1B visas were allocated in the lottery. And they were going to allocate them based on education levels and salary that you were like what salary range you were in. That went away, but these are things that they talk about doing. So again, if you're reading anything online and it's not making sense to you, or you're not sure if it applies to you, or maybe that's an old policy, the best thing you can do, again, talk to an immigration attorney, just clarify. But you do have to be, cognizant of that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we'll open the floor now, for our Q&A. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat inbox. We'll try to address as many as possible given the time. I see there's one already that came through from
Yes.
Sarah. She says that I recently graduated from Columbia University on a student visa and I'm applying for work for the work visa. What steps can I take to secure the H-1B visa and challenges I can expect in the application process?
Well, first off, congratulations on finishing your degree. That's always a great accomplishment. Um, the best first step for you, if you haven't already done it, is make sure you apply timely for your OPT, which is the practical training that you can have after your education. Depending on what you graduated with, you get 1 year of that. That's a work authorization. It's it's unrestricted in the sense that you can work for any employer, but you do have to work in a field related to what you studied, and there are some other restrictions on it. If you did a STEM degree, you have an additional time that you can extend it for an additional 24 months after that. So the first and foremost is get this OPT, because that's going to let you start applying for jobs right away. Once you have a job, it tends to make it easier to get sponsorship for a work visa because you're already working for an employer. They can see what you bring to the table, how you are as a worker. It doesn't foreclose you to getting someone else that you've never worked for to sponsor, but I've just seen it be easier for individuals to convince their employer to sponsor them. Then the next thing is, you know, the H-1B registration period generally opens in March. The exact dates are announced in late February, but it's just making sure your employer gets you registered in that time period that registration is, because it's a 2-week period usually, but it's very strict on the dates. If you miss the cutoff,
Yeah.
that's it. And just make sure the information is accurate in there, because it is now beneficiary tied, not job. It used to be you could get like 5 employers to put in for you. That quote unquote increased your chances of being selected. I don't know how accurate that is, but people thought
Mhm.
that. Now it is beneficiary centric. 5 employers can still enter you, but you're only entered once. If you're selected, then you can pick which one you want to go to. So, and lastly, if you do have your OPT, make sure you're complying with it. You can't have more than 9 days of unemployment.
Mhm.
And again, you need to be working in a field related to what your degree is. So no, DoorDash or Uber on the side.
Thank you. Thank you once again for that. So, for our audience, if you want to call in as well, you can call us on 516-703-3483. We are taking live calls coming in. We have another question from John Miguel. So, I'm planning to study in the US on the F1 student visa. How can I demonstrate my intent to return to my home country after my studies? So many visa refusals these days scares me.
It is scary. One of the best things you can do is if you have any ties to your home country, like if you own property or you have bank accounts, have those documents with you. If you have family ties, that also helps. Depending on, because unfortunately it doesn't clarify, if you're going, for example, a master's program and you're currently employed by a company and they're encouraging you to do this, you always have a letter from that employer saying, he works for us. We really want him to get this master's degree, and we're planning to bring him back on after he finishes his degree. That can help too. Um, it also is, what program are you doing? For example, individuals who are trying to get a visa for maybe just like English as a second language studies tend to face a harder time than someone who is going to a legitimate 4-year degree or into a master's program, um,
Mhm.
or a PhD level program. And also, it comes down to school. That's not to say that you can't go to any college that's authorized, but if you're going to a school that doesn't have the greatest reputation, and you can Google them, you'll find them, um, about past people. Yeah. If you're going to like Columbia or Harvard or University of Delaware or Hofstra, like schools that people know by name, you usually have a better chance of success. Um, and be prepared to explain what you want to do. You're coming here to get a degree. What's your plans later? You know, I want to get a degree in engineering, and my goal is to come back to my home country and work as an engineer in this particular area and help develop, you know, help build. I'm gonna make stuff up here. um,
Yeah.
you're gonna work as an engineer because you want to help your country develop infrastructure to help increase tourism, and that this is what your goal is and why you're doing this, and why coming to the U.S. is better than
Yeah.
pursuing telling them, look, I want to go to the U.S., study, hopefully get a job in the U.S. and stay there. That's going to kill your visa application. Um, So make sure you have a clear plan of what you want to do in the future in your home country.
All right. So we have another question that popped up by Maria. So I have been offered a temporary job in the US as a seasonal worker. What type of visa should I apply for, and what steps should my employer take to support my application?
Okay. So there's two types of visas that may be applicable, either the H2, which is eight, they're both H2. It's either A or B. So H2A is agricultural visa. So if the work is related to agriculture, then H2A is, as in Apple, is going to be your best. If it's more like um, temporary work in a resort, or uh, construction sometimes, that's going to be the H2B as in boy. With both of those visas, the employer has to first start doing paperwork with the Department of Labor. They have to get a labor certification that there is a need, a temporary need for this worker, and it could be you and many more. It's not limited to one. Most of these employers petition for multiple at a time. The Department of Labor will advertise the job. If the employer gets no qualified U.S. workers, then they do what's called the Form I-129, where they designate how many positions they need to fill, and you will be listed there. Once that petition's approved, then you actually file that DS-160 we talked about earlier, where you're applying for your H-2B or H-2A. You'll need your passport, you'll need that approval notice, and a letter, usually a letter from the employer confirming the role you'll be filling. Um, and some other documents that show that you understand the nature of the job and your rights. There's very specific rights to protect seasonal workers related to wages, dates of payment, cost for living expenses. You'll be provided all this. If they don't give you information, be wary because it's probably a scam. So I see we got questions in the chat too. I'm sorry I'm taking
Yes,
over
we
your
do.
job.
No, 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 that's fine. Awesome. So we have another question from Ahmed. So I entered the US on tourist visa, but now want to switch to a student visa. What is the process for changing my status?
All right, so first and foremost, you need to get admitted to a school. So you need to sit down and talk to one or more colleges or universities, figure out where you want to go, apply, get admitted. Once you have the admission that we talked about earlier, the school is going to give you a document, what's called an I-20. That's showing proof that they have essentially admitted you, the program dates, what program you're going to do, the cost of that program. They give you that. Then you take that and you file what's called a Form I-539. You're going to file that with your I-20, copy of your passport, proof that you can financially afford school. And that doesn't necessarily mean out of your pocket. It can come from
Certainly.
a parent.
Sorry to just to
Um,
come in. We have a caller that's calling in, so let's take this call and see what it is.
okay.
Hi there. Welcome to immigrationquestion.com. KB speaking. You can go ahead with your question.
Hey, hi. So I have a question that how can a non-immigrant visa holder change visa categories while in the US?
Well, it's going to depend on what visa category do you want to change to? Um,
Hi. We lost the caller there. So hopefully she calls back soon so we can answer her on that.
So back to Ahmed. So
Yes.
Ahmed, I didn't forget you. So you'll need proof that you can afford the school. That can either be your own personal finances, or if you have a family member, or maybe you got scholarships to offset the cost. And you're going to file that with USCIS. You need to file that before your current stay expires.
Mhm.
Um, and make sure that's all in. Again, that was Form I-539. You can do it yourself, or you can work with an attorney to help make sure you do everything. That's pretty
Awesome.
much the answer for him. Um,
All right. So we got a question from David. My sister wants to visit me in the US for the festive holidays, but she has a complicated immigration history. What should she consider when applying for the B2 tourist visa, and how can she strengthen her application?
so I'm going to give you some general tips, but honestly, it's going to really depend on what that complicated immigration history means. Generally speaking, things that you can do to strengthen your application is if it's for a temporary trip for the holidays, for example, if she's working in her country, have a letter for employer confirming she's employed, the position, salary, that she's requested to take X number of days or weeks for vacation. It's been approved and that they anticipate her to return to the work, the date she's supposed to come back. If she has bank statements or other assets in the country, like a home, an apartment, even if she doesn't own it, like a lease showing financial obligations, those can be helpful. Um, if she has other family, like for example, a spouse and or children, but only she's gonna come. I know that's hard, and most people want to travel together as a family. But one of the things she can think about is if it's, she can come by herself, because the presumption is you're not going to leave
Mhm.
your family permanently. You're going to come back to that. But again, since you specified complicated, I'd really want to know what you mean by that before going too far, because that could mean waivers. So.
All right. So we have a question from James that's through as well. So I'm in the country expert in Spain. I have two branches of my own restaurant. I want to start a restaurant business in the US. What are my options of securing the right investor visa, and what key documents do I need?
Okay. So Most likely, you're going to be doing what's called an E2 visa. That's the non-immigrant investor visa. That visa allows you to open, um, would allow you to open a business. What you really need to do to show this is you're going to have to show um, you have an entity that you've invested or are actively investing in this industry. You also need to show where the money came from. Source of funds is very important. They want to make sure it's not from illicit gains. And then you need to show typically a business plan. This business plan, I know
Yeah.
there's business plans that people get for like going to the bank.
Hmm.
There's also styles for immigration, and that immigration style focuses not just on like financial projections for 5 years, but also staffing, because it's not just about money for immigration. The investment they want to see, you're creating jobs, you're making money, there's payroll taxes, there's going to be income taxes that are going to be coming from this. It's not designed for you to come and just live here essentially on whatever you earn. They want to see a business and they want to see growth. And then one thing, it sounds like you're already there. I always tell people, if you're going to do an investment visa, make sure it's in an industry you know. Don't decide I'm going to get a franchise in a Subway when you've never worked in a restaurant, or
True.
open a gas station when all your life you've been a chef. It doesn't make sense. You don't know how to run that business. You have a stronger application if you stay in your wheelhouse. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you can't vary a little bit, but it should still be somewhat related to your past experience and your education.
Awesome. And again, really good advice, some good insights. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for all joining, for joining us for the session. A special thank you to our guest speaker for sharing her time and expertise. We cannot wait to have you back on the next show. We hope this webinar answered some of the pressing questions on understanding non-immigrant visas, essential insights, and application strategies. Once again, visit our website at immigrationquestion.com to connect with an experienced immigration attorney who can guide you through your unique situation. If you have missed any part of this session or would love to listen again, catch us on Spotify. The live stream is being recorded and will be live to listening on Spotify. Simply search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com and listen into today's session and any previous sessions of your choice. See you on our next session once again. Same time, same place, same platform. Until then, stay informed, stay empowered in your immigration journey. And from my side, have yourself an awesome day.